Hello everyone, this is Mike and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be looking at creating an HTML report using PowerShell, and this will be part one of two videos here. So we're going to have one creating the basic report, which is in essence just going to focus on the PowerShell side of things, like how to actually put together a complex HTML report. And then I'm going to put out a part two later on this week, which is going to be looking at making the report look fancy. So, bringing in like cascading style sheets or CSS settings and stuff like that. Okay, so with that, let's move over to the lab environment. So for today, I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code and PowerShell 7 for putting this together. But realistically, if you still use the ISE or PowerShell 5 or whatever, that would be perfectly fine as well. Okay, so let's first of all look at what creating HTML basically is here, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an overly complex operation here. So first of all, let me take my PowerShell console here and just make the font a bit bigger so everybody has an easier time of being able to see this. There we go. Okay, and we'll clear the screen. And so with HTML reporting, you're relying on a commandlet called convert to HTML, right? And so that commandlet has been around for, man, I don't know how long. At least PowerShell 3 with Windows 7, but I do believe it's older than that. I want to go out on a limb and said it was in PowerShell 2 that came out, before that. So with that being said, how do I use it? So let's say, for instance, you have something that's creating some type of output. So in this case, let's say I'm going to do get service name and maybe grab a bunch of services that start with the letter B. And for whatever reason, let's say I want to take this and I want to make an HTML output out of it. So there's a lot of different commandlets that are there for doing the output side of things, for taking objects that are in PowerShell's pipeline and making output out of them. Okay, so you may have seen convert to CSV, export CSV, export CLI XML, um, convert to JSON, for instance. And so all of those commandlets could be used. And we also have convert to HTML. Okay, so if I wanted to use that, first of all, you probably want to make sure when you're exporting or you're converting, you're recognizing the amount of information that's on the objects in the pipeline. Okay, so in this case, I have this commandlet running and it's producing, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so let's say we have 9 objects that are in the pipeline. Now, each of these objects you can see on the screen here, it has status name and display name, but keep in mind those are not necessarily all of the properties that are there. Okay, so if I were to let's say, pipe this over to maybe select object and property star, let me see all of the properties. You can see for each particular service, it's got a lot of stuff on it. Okay, so I don't necessarily want all of this exported out into a file. Okay, so I might want to be selective here. So maybe if I just want I don't know, name and status, let's say. Oh, and maybe start type. Okay, so oops, that was supposed to be a comma, not a period. There we go. All right, so in this case, I now have an object, but that object just has 3 properties. Okay, so if I, and again, kind of look at this in get member, I have my object and the 3 properties that are there. All right, so let's say that's now what I want to send out to HTML. So all I have to do with this is do convert to HTML, and then in the PowerShell's pipeline, it'll format it away from a .NET objects, which are normally what are in the pipeline, and it will write it out as a bunch of string data, creating HTML objects. So if you notice here, you can see it's creating a table. You can see that opening element and the closing element there. We've got all the table rows here. We could see the header, the opening of the HTML document, the closing HTML document down there, closing body tag, opening body tag right there. So you basically have an HTML document here. So when you run convert to HTML just on its own, it will create a complete HTML document. Okay, so all I have to do now to make a file out of this is to send this or pipe this over to out file and give it some place to go. So I'm using the stuff folder here, and I'll just call it out1.htm or HTML. Either file extension is fine. So I do that, and then if I come in here and let's go find it, so C colon stuff, and there's my out1 HTML. So I pop that open and I can see, there's my HTML output. It's awesome, right? Couldn't ask for a better looking report if you tried. Okay, so everything is good there. Now, where some of the complexity comes in is if you wanted to create multiple pieces of output. So imagine if I wanted to maybe grab the services and then maybe I wanted to grab, I don't know, processes to go with it. Okay, so this again by using convert to HTML creates a complete HTML document. And if I were to do something like get process and maybe just grab, I don't know, the first 10 here, this, if I were to take this and send it to convert to HTML, again, that would make a complete HTML document as well. Okay, so if I go kind of all the way up to the beginning here, I can see there's the opening HTML tag right there. And then if I scroll down, oops, scroll down too far, scroll down, I can see the closing HTML tag right there. So that makes this a little hard if you wanted to combine different pieces of output together. Okay, so what I'm going to do in a script here that I'm going to start writing in a moment is I'm going to take and do a user script. So basically it's going to query Active Directory and find a few different pieces of information. So I'm actually going to be running like 3 different queries, and I'm going to need to take those 3 different pieces and make one HTML document out of it. So kind of the same thing here. Imagine if I wanted to combine get process and get service together. So I want them both to output and combine this together. So in order to be able to do that, you need to dig a little deep onto the convert to HTML commandlet. So if I look at this commandlet, I can see that it does have a few properties to play with. Okay, so you can tell it like what particular properties you want to be included. So if you didn't want to use like select object like I was using to figure out those properties, you can add a header onto this. You could add a title, the body. So that would be basically the core part of the report here. You could have things you're piping in, input objects. So that would be like the data I was piping in, like get service or get process. Uh, and the part I want to focus on here, which is very useful when you want to combine things together here, is this fragment parameter. So with fragment, you can create different pieces of HTML and then in essence combine them later. Okay, so for instance, if I took the get service one here, and instead of just kicking out to a file, let me just have it write the PowerShell right to the pipeline here again, or the HTML code right to the pipeline. You can see here it's doing the complete HTML. So there's the opening HTML, there's the closing HTML. So it's making a complete document. However, if I tell convert to HTML to make a fragment, notice the fragment, it just makes the table. Okay, so what I could do is I can utilize that. I can bring multiple fragments together into this, let's see, where is it here? Into this body parameter. See how body takes multiple values, right? So I can combine multiple fragments together in order to make one HTML document, which is ultimately what I'm going to end up doing here. Okay. So we could also control the fragments. You notice there's an as parameter here, so you could do a table or a list, and we could do different ones depending on what our needs are, if you will. Right? So that's kind of where we're going to begin here. So I'm going to pop open Visual Studio Code or VS Code. We're going to do a new file. This is going to be a, actually, let me just totally ruined that there. Let's just do a text file. Let's pick PowerShell as the language. And we're now making PowerShell. I don't need the getting started one here. And before I do anything else, let me just go ahead and save this. I'll save this in my stuff directory here. And maybe we'll call this user report. How about that? All right, and then typically with all of my scripts, when I begin them, I typically start with commandlet binding, and then we have some type of parameter block that we're going to use, right? So the first parameter that I'm probably going to see myself creating is obviously I need to query a user, right? So how about I just make this as a string, and we'll just call it user. Okay, will be our parameter. All right, and we'll leave it at that. Okay, a very simple parameter block. All right, now the next thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to grab some information. Okay, so I'm going to query Active Directory. So this computer does have the Active Directory RSAT tools installed on it. So for Windows 10, if you don't know how to do that, you could right-click the Start button to bring up the WinX menu here. Go to like Apps and Features, go to Optional Features, and then in here, we're going to add a feature. And if you go down into here, you'll see a bunch of RSAT ones here. Okay, so the Active Directory one's not showing up because I already have it installed, but this is where you could find it. So if you look at my installed features, you can see right here, I've got the RSAT Active Directory Domain Services and Lightweight Services tools here. And this box here is a Windows 10 box. It is joined to my Active Directory domain. My domain name is chassis.com. Right, so that's where I am administering from. All right. Now with that as well, let's open up users and computers. And we could see, again, I have a few kind of sample users here. So the one I'm going to make the report on is this Jeff Kent user. And in Jeff Kent, I have a couple things populated in here. So for instance, if I look at the, let's see. So I've got the telephone populated, profile. So I've got a few, pieces set up in here. So I've got the title, the department, the manager set, things like that. Right. So first of all here, we want to go and kind of have an idea of what information, let's say we want to go get. Okay, so I know I'm going to be doing a get 80 user query. So I'm just going to kind of play with that in the console here. So if I type get 80 user and the identity here of 80 user J Kent, that's the user, the SAM account name for that user account. And I can see the information that comes back. Now, some of the things I might be interested here, like for instance, I see the name, right? I'm probably going to want that. Probably want the same account name. Maybe I want to do something with distinguished name here. I'll figure something out with that in a moment. We could see maybe the user principal name. Maybe I want to grab the email address. Email address was not really populated here. Maybe I should populate that one. Email jkent at. Now, you might not have to populate that in your environment. It might automatically do it, but anyway, so let's say I'm grabbing that. All right. Now notice here with get 80 user, if I pipe this over to get member, there's only like 10 properties that come back. Okay, so that's kind of a downer for me, right? I want some other things here, like I wanted the title, I wanted the phone number, I wanted the manager, the department, and none of that is returned by default in this query. So you have to tell Active Directory what to go get. So if you want it to get more stuff, you can tell it via the properties parameter and tell it what extra stuff you want it to come back with other than the 10 properties that it gets by default. Right? So in this case, like if I wanted title, I could tell it to go grab the title property. Right? And notice that that's now returned as well. Okay, or if you just want to be lazy and tell it grab all of the properties, just throw a wild card in there, an asterisk. Okay, so that'll go grab everything. Okay, so now I could examine this and see what properties I literally want to bring back. Okay, like not properties I want to bring back. This is bringing back everything, but what properties do I want to put in my report? How about that? Okay, so we've already established we wanted the name, right? So we have a name right here, right? And we probably wanted department. So department's right there. And we wanted, let's see, I'll probably want like last logon date. Okay, when's the last time Jeff logged on? The mail. Now notice it's not email. See how it's titled as mail. So sometimes the property that you see here, the name of it here doesn't always match the actual LDAP property value. Okay, so this is another reason to go and look at this so you make sure you get your property names correct. So mail is actually mail. All right. And last logon date again was last logon date. Let's see. So we also wanted the phone number. So notice that shows up as mobile, right? So that's what I want to go grab. Manager. Okay, so that's correct. Let's see. And let's see. I wanted looking for, oh yeah, here's script path right here. Okay, so I wanted that as well. So that was the value that went with let's see, under right here, logon script. So that is a property called script path. Okay, so that's what we're grabbing there. Okay, so those are the things we're going to go and put into our report here. So those are the properties that I'm going to want to utilize. Okay, so let's start off here with that. So if we do a get 80 user, and the identity would be from the $user parameter. Okay? And we want to tell it not partition, we want to tell it properties star. Okay? And then from there, we're going to bring it over to select object so I can just kind of key in on the properties that I want, right? So I wanted name, I wanted department, I wanted script path. We wanted mobile. Let's see, we wanted manager, title, mail, and maybe like a last logon date. Okay, were the properties that I wanted here. It's a nice little list. All right, so nice little list here. Let me make the ISE, if I could get to the end of the ISE there just to drag it. There we go. And yeah, do for now. Okay. And so last logon date. All right. So that looks good there. And so that should give me the information. So I'm just going to save the script for a sec here. I'm going to go into my PowerShell console here. Change the directory over to C:stuff. Oops. C:stuff. And let's go ahead and run this. User report, user jkent. Okay, so we got name, department, script path, mobile, manager, title, mail, last logon. Okay, so that looks good. I wanted to do something with distinguished name as well. So let me just tack that onto the list there. Distinguished name. And again, save that. And let's try running the script again. Oh, and I didn't spell distinguished right. Distinguished name. That should do it. Funny how spelling is important, right? All right. So that's, let's say, the first part of the report here. Now, I keep mentioning parts to the report. Well, what else am I going to do? I'm also going to want to grab the group memberships. So if you look at a couple videos I posted earlier this month, I did one which was converting a .NET script into a PowerShell script, and that happened to find nested group memberships. And then I did another video where I improved upon that, where I added in some different output, some different parameters. So I'm basically going to do two different queries with that script, if you will. I'm going to do one to find the direct group memberships, and I'm going to use another query of that to find the nested groups. So that's basically what my report's going to look like. So I have this information that's going to be the raw user facts. That's going to be the first section of the report. Then I'm going to have a section for the direct group memberships, and then I'm going to have a section for the nested group memberships. And if we look at Jeff Kent here, if I open up his user account, if we look at member of, you see he is listed as a couple direct members of these groups here. These are global groups, hence the GL in their name. And then these groups themselves, if I go look at them, these GL groups, they are members of other groups as well. So notice this marketing one is a member of this universal group called UNIV Marketing, and then that is actually a member of a domain local group. And then this one right here that's not nested. Where's the one that is? So again, this one here, you could see a member of that domain local group. Okay. So a few different group structures here, and here's sales. You could see that's a member of a domain local group as well. So there is some nesting going on here. And so I want to put all of that into my report here. Okay. Now, the first thing that I want to do though is, well, I guess I've already got this kind of like situated out here. And this is actually how I want the output to look. This is list output, where you got the name of the property and then the value. So name of the property, value, name of the property, value, and so on. Okay, so that's fine there. And let's say that's what I want to do. Okay, so some of it though, I might want to clean up a little bit. So for instance, like you take last logon date, maybe I just want the date and I don't necessarily want the time. Okay, so I could utilize a method on a date time object called toShortDateString to grab just this piece of info and toss this, because this is a date time object. That's what last logon date produces. And the rest of these are just plain old strings, right? So I could manipulate them. So for instance, I might want to take distinguished name and just grab the this piece out of it right here. Okay, so in this case, I want to make a property called OU, and that would be the name of the OU that the user is in. right? So let's say I wanted to clean this one up as well. So we'll do a little work to these two properties here. Okay, so how do I go about doing that? Well, from an HTML perspective, it has absolutely nothing to do with HTML. Okay, so just throw that out there. This is just modifying the information that happens to be in PowerShell's pipeline. Okay, so how do I go about doing that? So first of all, let's clean up the select object line a little bit here, where I probably want these things, even though it doesn't matter. Notice in my output, see how they're all kind of like lowercase, right? It's using the format of the property the exact way that I typed it in on select object. So if I want to kind of make these look a little fancier, I can just kind of do a bit of capitalizing here. Okay? Again, if you wanted to make it look nice, I mean, you certainly don't have to, but if you're going to go to the hassle of making an HTML report, it might be advisable to do. All right? So let's maybe do something like that. Actually, the last two I'm not even going to bother with because I'm going to do something else with those. All right. So first also, let's go ahead, save that, and then we'll try running the script again and notice how they look nicer now. Okay, so that's cool right there. Okay, now I mentioned I want to do something else with these. So with these, we're going to do something called calculated properties. So we're going to do a little work in there. Okay, and to do this, so I don't have to keep scrolling all the time, scrolling back to the end, scrolling back to the beginning, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take select object here, and after, let's say, mail, I'm going to do a carriage return. You can do that. That's allowed in the scripting environments here. So you could do carriage returns after pipe symbols, after semicolons, after commas, and PowerShell still treats these two lines as one line of code. Right? And the reason why I want to do this is because I'm going to be doing work to these two properties. So I'm going to kind of put them on their own line to make it stand out a little bit. Okay, so, and hence the tabbing here, just to kind of, again, make it stand out a little more as well. I should have only done one tab depth though. Let's do that. Okay, so to make a calculated property, I basically make a hash table. So I start with an @ sign, open a curly bracket, and then close the curly bracket. And then everything inside of that is a calculated property. Now, with the calculated property, you're basically like, think of it this way, you're creating a new property. So I'll start with what I want the name of my property to be. So name equals, and let's call this last logon. Okay, so that's what I want it to be called. Then I've got a semicolon, and then I have my expression equals, and then that is a script block. Okay, so we're going to go put a script block around this. Now, something to note with script blocks is when you're in a script block, you can use the variable that represents the objects in the pipeline. Okay, so remember this thing here is still a part of select object, and so it's seeing the objects that were piped in from the previous commandlet. Right? So if I use $_ or $PS item, that's fine. Either one will work. And so I like using $_. I do a dot as the separator. I want to grab the data out of the last logon date. And from that, I want to call the toShort date string method with no arguments on it. Okay, so that is one that has an empty argument list. Okay, so that looks good. Let me go ahead and save this, and let's make sure I didn't blow anything up. So let's run the script again, and notice now last logon looks good. Okay, so we got that piece. Now the next one is going to be a little more complex. Like I need to go grab this piece of information out of this overall string here. Okay. Now, this will vary depending on the user that I happen to utilize. So in this case, I need to grab everything from here. Okay, so I need to ignore the string up to here, grab this, and ignore the rest of the string going out. Now, the problem that you run into is if your user account is in the user's container, the distinguished name has CN equals users. However, if my user was in like groups here, this would be OU equals groups. Like the distinguished name is different. Right? So that's something like to factor in when you're doing this is your distinguished names might be a little different depending on what's going on here. Okay, so like what I got GLIT. So let's maybe do a get 80 group and identity GLIT. Yeah, see, notice here how the distinguished name, so for Jeff Kent, it was CN equals users, but notice how the distinguished name here, it's OU equals, and then that's the name of the OU. So the first part's fairly reliant on it's always going to be CN equals, right? So that's, the name of the group or the name of the user. That's always going to be CN. So that's like common name or canonical name, okay? CN. So it's always going to be that. And then if your object is in a regular OU, it then starts with OU equals. And if it's in a container, so that's basically not the same as an OU. If it's in a container, it starts with CN equals. So the containers here, how do you tell the difference? You basically look at the symbol here. So if you look at built-in computers, foreign security principals, managed service accounts, users. Those are all containers. Groups and domain controllers, those are organizational units. And if you notice, the symbols here are different. Okay, so an OU has like a little something inside of like the folder looking icon here, and a container does not. Okay, now you might think, well, how do you make them? Usually when you make an OU, like if I come up in here and right click and do a new organizational unit, and I'll just call it test just for demo purposes here, see how it makes that same symbol there. So that's truly an OU. And most of the containers are ones that come with Active Directory by default. Like you've never actually made them. So when usually we make structure in here, we're usually making OUs. And the containers are the default locations that came with the Active Directory environment. Okay? So with that being said, how do I grab like this piece, right? That's all I'm interested in. And if I was doing it with this, I would just want to grab this. Okay, so how do I go about doing that? Well, you can actually use something in regular expressions called capture groups. So if you're not familiar with regex, we want to describe this text string here. So let me go ahead and go out to the internet here. Um, and my apologies, this guy does not have internet access. Let me, bear with me one sec. Let me change over to my DC that does have internet access. And let's crank that up. And let's go to a site called regex101.com. And my test string was right there. Okay, so that's what we're playing around with. And I want to craft together a regular expression that matches this as close to I can. All right. So basically, how do I do that? Well, there's a whole bunch of, if you look kind of down here, there's a lot of different quick reference things that tells, like a single character or single token, stuff like that. So you have different ways of describing the data. So for instance, I start with Shift 6 to do that, I can't remember what that character is called. I always call it a party hat, but I think it's like a carrot, I think is what it's called. So that describes the beginning of the string. And you can see here it kind of in our test string, it kind of matched that. So then I'm expecting to see Cn equals, Cn equals, and notice how it highlights that part. So that's what I've described so far. Now the next will vary depending on the name of the user. So there could be any characters in there. So to do any character, I could use a period for that. So I put a period in and see how it matched on the J. And then I use a wildcard. I'm going to use an asterisk, which matches. So basically, I'm saying with the period, I'm saying any character. And then with the asterisk, I'm saying multiple of them. Okay, now notice here as I hover over the asterisk, look up in this qualifier here. Let me hover over it again and look at the very bottom line. See where it says greedy in parentheses. Okay, so I don't want this operator to be greedy. I want it to be lazy. Okay, so what am I talking about with greedy versus lazy? So if I were to say, like for instance, describing the string, so if I say any character, multiple of them, I want it to stop at the comma, right? So if I just put a comma in there, see how it gobbles as much as it can, stopping at a comma. So I don't want it to stop at the last comma. I want it to stop at the first comma. So I want this to be a lazy wild card, not a greedy wild card. So before the comma, I put a question mark there, and that turns that now into a lazy quantifier. So you notice right at that last word in the black box there, it says lazy. Okay, and notice what it matched up with now. So that now got me the username part. And then I want to keep going. So the next part might not be CN. Remember in my example here, it could be OU equals, right? So I want any word character, so any letter. So that would be backslash W, and then backslash W, and then an equal sign. Okay, so that's now matched up on the beginning part here. And it would match up if this piece right here was CN equal or OU equals. So then I've got the username, the OU part that I want. So that would be, again, any character, multiple of them. I want it to be lazy, to the next comma, and then any character, multiple of them. Okay? So now what I do to isolate this part right here is I make something that's called a capture group. So in the capture group part, you take the part in the regex query that is the part you want to capture, and you put parentheses around it. So I wanted to capture this piece right here, right? So I wanted the any character, multiple of them as lazy, right? So that goes off of users here. And notice how it found that. See how it matched up on group one, and it's showing users, right? So now, if I were to grab that other text string here, bear with me, I'm not going to show it on my screen, but I'm just going to go grab that other text string with the group one and try pasting that in. See how it matches up properly on groups as well. Okay, so that kind of it fed, or it's reading the string correctly, which is the goal here, right? Okay, so now how do I go about utilizing that? So let me go grab that regex and let's switch VMs back to where we're writing our script. And in the script itself here, let me just go paste that in, and we're going to do something with that in a moment here. So let me just um, wrap it around some quotes here. Okay, just to kind of hold on to it. Okay, so now we want to make another calculated property out of this. So I'll start off with the at sign, open. We need to give it a name. Name equals, and let's call this, I'll just call it OU. Right? How about that? And then backslash, and then expression equals, and then we got our script block, and then this whole thing is going to be in that script block, and then a final quote there just to close the calculated property. Okay, now when I'm doing name and expression, understand that a lot of people abbreviate those. So expression could just be E equals, and name could be like four different things in here. It could be N equals, name equals, L equals, or label equals. There's a lot of different stuff you could put in there. Okay, so then we want to take the object in the pipeline, the distinguished name property, and we want to do replace, and this is the from string, which is our regular expression with our capture group. And then after that, we're going to do a comma. And then this has to be single quotes because you call a capture group by a dollar sign. So I do $1 to tell it I want the first capture group, which is going to be this piece right here. All right, so let's go ahead and save that. And let's run to that, and oops, that's not running it. Hold on. There we go. Cool. So we modified last logon, and we added a property here called OU. Right? So that's going to be the first part of the HTML report. Okay, so now let's go about making said HTML. All right, so in order for this to work properly, we are going to need to save this as an HTML fragment. Right? So first things first, we're going to have to take the result of this, and we're going to, after the select here, so that whole thing is select object, let's just do a pipe, and let's bring it down to the next line here. And we are going to send this, let's see, convert to HTML, and we're going to want a fragment out of this, and we're going to want to format it as a list. Right? So, and take the whole darn result here and save it in a variable. So maybe this will be $frag1. Okay? Now's about the time I start making like Fraggle Rock jokes and stuff like that. If anybody's familiar with Fraggle Rock, you are probably my age range. I'm 49 years old, and I can remember watching Fraggle Rock as a. It was like an equivalent to like the Muppets back when I was a kid. So if anybody knows about Fraggle Rock, feel free to make a comment in the comments here. For those of you that have no clue what I'm talking about, you're probably either a lot older than me or a lot younger than me. But anyway, so Fraggle Rock was pretty cool back in the day. And granted, I think I was like 6 years old, but you know, I thought a lot of things were cool back then. All right, so that gets this first part out of the way. Okay, now let's go and let's say this was the only part I wanted to do. Okay, so let's just kind of finish this up, just to show this first piece here from beginning to end. Okay, so now let's say we wanted to, again, ultimately, I'm going to modify this to add more stuff to it, but let's do convert to HTML on its own. We want a body of that fragment. Frag1, and then let's say we want to take this, kick it out to a file, and let's do, I know I'm hard coding a path here, just bear with me, I'll make that better later on. And let's just call this test1.htm. All right. So Control S to save this, and then let's see what we got. Okay, so first of all, let's go ahead and run the script. Now it should produce no screen output right now, right? Because I'm saving it all to a file. So let's go, oh, there's out one. No, I did test one. There we go. So let's open up test one. And what do you know? There's all of our information. So it read that fragment in no problem and made HTML out of it. All right. So that's cool. So that gets our first part done. Rocking here. Okay. Now probably the next thing I'd want to improve on would be this right here. I don't want to hard code a path in there. Okay, so what I could do with that is we could throw up in the parameter block. Let's make another parameter. This will be string, and then maybe we'll call it file name. Or how about, yeah, let's call it HTML file name. Yeah, that makes it sound fancier. Okay. And then down into the bottom part here, what do I want to do with that? Well, I want to utilize that like here, and then maybe I'll set the script up so it saves it where the current prompt is, where you're running the script from. So whatever the PowerShell working directory is. Okay, so that would be in something called a variable called PWD, which is one of these automatic variables that exists in PowerShell. So let's say so the out file again. I didn't put the parameter in there. I probably should. So let's do so we're gonna want to do, let's see, file path, and then let's put quote in there. We want $pwd, and then the backslash, and then $html file. Yeah. So let's try that as the path. All right, so let's save that. And then, so now we need the HTML file path. How about we'll call this test2.htm. Run it, go look. Hey, we've got a test2, and it's got the same stuff in it. Perfect. Okay, so we're rocking and rolling here. All right, so if you don't want to get overly complex with this, that could be one way of potentially saving a path where you want to put something. All right. So the next part here, we want some group information, right? So in order to do that, I want to take advantage of another script that I wrote earlier, this get groups one here, okay, which you feed it a SAM account name, and it will spit out the group membership. So again, I added a few parameters to it, which will grab the direct, the nested, or the all. Okay, so right now I have this in its own standalone script. So if I were to play around with it, I could do this get groups to, and then SAM account name J Kent, and notice how it spits out all of the groups, the direct and the nested. Apologize for that little warning there. The direct and the nested. And I could tell it different output modes. So if I want just the direct groups, it could spit that out. Or if I want just the nested, it could spit that out as well. Right? Or if I want to do output all. So again, if you're wondering how I put this together, go check out my videos on converting a .NET script into a PowerShell script. There's two videos. I have one where I do basically the conversion, and then I have another one where I'm adding improvements like this output parameter. So that's not in the original .NET script. Okay, so let's say I want to utilize, I don't want to call a script though. I mean, ultimately, I would probably be putting all of this stuff in functions in a module, but I'm just kind of doing development here. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to take the code of the script here, this get group script, and I'm going to copy it. So highlight, Control A to highlight all, Control C. And then I'm going to go to user report, and at the beginning of user report, I'm going to make a function out of this. So I'm going to throw the word function. If I could spell function, throw function in there. How about I just call it nested? And then I open the function and then close it, right? So there's the opening, then there's the closing right there. And let's go paste this code. So Control V, and that's now inside that function, right? And since I don't want to be staring at it, I could take the function here and, let's say we just want to like minimize it, okay? So all of that code is in this function called nested. Right? So that way it now kind of lives in this script, if you will. All right. So now I want to grab that information and I want to put that in another fragment that is ultimately going to be in my HTML report. So let's do dollar. Actually, before I put in a fragment, let's make sure it works first, right? So let's call the nested function, and the SAM account name would be the same as I was calling up here for identity, right? So $user, and output mode, I wanted to just grab the direct group memberships first. Right, so that's what I want to go grab. And I'm just going to leave it like this. Okay, so let's do a save on this. And let's go run the script. And now I don't really care. This is not going to be in the file. I just want to see if the screen output is correct. And it is. Right, so yeah, so it wrote stuff to a file, but this was written to the screen and it outputted correctly. So you could see that like right here. Okay, so now let's capture that and use that. So let's store that in frag2, and let's use the same convert to HTML. Except this time I want to do a table out of it. And then we could go down to the body here and add that fragment onto the body. Okay, like so. All right, so we're adding another piece into there. All right, now let's go give it a shot. I did a Control S to save it. I know you can't see me do that. It's a keyboard shortcut, but I just did Control S. And then let's go and try and run this. And maybe we'll put this in another file here. So let's do test3. If you don't change the file name, it will overwrite whatever file was there, by the way. So we'll go ahead and run this. And oh, we're getting some errors here. Okay, so convert to HTML, cannot convert system object to type system string required by parameter body. Specified methods not supported. Okay, so what's happening with that is everything worked perfectly fine when I just had one variable in on the body, when I just had frag1 there. So it reads it fine that way. When you start combining multiple string objects together, or multiple variables together, they're each being seen as arrays, not as strings, because they have multiple things in them. And that's kind of freaking out the body parameter here. So what you do to fix that is in your fragments, whatever you're doing with the fragment, you finish it up with an out string. So each fragment is outed as a single string. So if I throw those lines onto there, we could see that information. Okay, so out string and out string. Okay, so I just combined those as the end of the different frag lines here. So now if I go run this, it did not error, which was nice. And if I go look at HTML3, we could see that there's the first part, which is awesome, but what the heck is that? So length 22 and 8. So that's happening with this uh, with this line right here. Okay, so the problem that's happening is my script or my function here, which kicks out the group memberships, it outputs them as strings, right? So they are in string format. So if I go kind of run to this here, you can see the groups, and if I pipe it to get member, um, we could see that there's, let's see, so it is producing strings, right? All right, now the problem with a string is convert to HTML is very literal. It will literally take whatever objects are in the pipeline, in this case, string objects, and it will look at those objects and grab the properties into them. Okay, and with a string object, the actual string is not one of the properties. That's kind of one of the weird things with strings. Like if I were to put, let's say like $A equals, I don't know, Mike. Okay, so let's say that's a string, right? And if I just kind of hit the string, it enumerates the kind of the value of the string object. But if you look at this, by sending it, so first of all, send it to get member, you can see that a string object has a property inside of it, which is length, which is the length of the string. So if I were to do something like select object property length, see how it spits out 4, which was the length of the string. MIKE, that's 4 characters. So what you need to do if you have a pipeline of string objects, which is what I have here, before you hand it off to convert to HTML, you have to take those string objects and make them a different kind of object. So you can actually do that by doing a calculated property similar to what I did up here. So let me go over here and let's put convert to HTML down on its own line, and then let's throw the next line here. Let's do select object, and then property. We're just going to do some calculated properties here. So no big deal. So let's try. Let's do an at. And then let's see, what do I want to call this? Let's do name equals, and then maybe we'll call it direct groups, right? And then semicolon, and then my expression equals, so I'll just do the E equals there. And for expression, all I'm going to do is just grab the object that's in the pipeline, or objects that are in the pipeline. Okay, and then we'll pipe that over to convert to HTML. So this is all one big line here. I just have it, carriage returned off the pipe symbols here. All right, so let's go give that a shot. So we save that. Let's go run it. I'll overwrite the file that's there, and let's see if we have the values in here. Sweet. There we go. All right, so we got that, we got that. Very nice. All right, so that gets us the direct groups, and then all we need to do now to get the nested groups is just kind of duplicate this section here, except changing the output from direct to nested. To grab those. So remember, those were, again, just different parameters on my script that's being called as this function here. Okay? So let me grab this line here, and let's call it frag3. And for output, I want the nested groups. So again, it's reading that because remember in my script, I literally have, um, remember this script here is what's loaded in that function called nested. Um, I have a parameter called output, which can either have direct, nested, or all. All right. So let's go back over here. So that's in frag3. And let's change the name of that. So that would be nested groups. And then we'll throw the comment in here and tell it to grab frag3 as well. And save this. And let's go ahead, run it. It made the file. Let's go look at the file. And there we go. So we've got the name there. So there's the information from get80user. Here's the direct group memberships for that user. And here are the nested group memberships for that user. All right. And there we go. So that's the crude part of the HTML report here. I know it doesn't look all that fancy. So again, I understand that, but again, we got to start somewhere. Okay. So again, this was the code here. Kind of minimize that down. So this was the code. Since I'm going to be doing a part 2 to this video, I'm not going to put a link to this script here yet because we're technically not done with it, but this video is already up to an hour here. So hence why I wanted to do a part 2 after the fact. Okay. So this is where we're going to leave it for now with the raw data in HTML. Now I know it looks like, well, it doesn't look very fancy. But that's enough to get us going here. And maybe for some people, this is awesome, right? Like, hey, Mike, that's the best HTML report ever. Because I have, 3 different queries that I'm pulling information in as fragments. And that's exactly what I was looking for, right? So that's understandable. However, if we want to fancy this up, we're going to need to do a little more work to it. So that's going to bring in using some HTML tags, using cascading style sheets, things like that. So we're going to save that for part 2 of this series here. So with that, let me bring this one to a close. So thank you everyone if you hung out with me till the end here and watched everything. If you like the content, again, I am a new channel. Please consider liking and subscribing, especially subscribing. Subscribing really helps the growth of my channel. So if you could do that, be greatly appreciated. And be on the lookout for part 2, where I'm going to be adding some HTML tags, adding some cascading style sheet information in here, and that kind of stuff. So with that, have a good one, and we'll see you in the next video.